Okay. Okay, good evening. My name is Ipek Yeginsu, and I'm the curator of the Web Biennial 2020 APEIRON. And tonight we have the one and only Kurt Hentschlager with us. Kurt, thank you very much for joining us for this great artist talk. Kurt was born in Austria and lives and works in New York. He studied at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna and also with Peter Weibel, I suppose. His work mainly consists of immersive audiovisual installations. And we'll be talking more in detail about his body of work and more specifically Ort, his work that is available on the Web Biennial's website as well. So the stage is yours, Kurt.
Thanks, Ipek. Wonderful to be here, be part of the Web Biennial. It's fantastic.
Our pleasure.
So I actually I started, I think back, in the 90s, early 90s. With my then partner in a project we called Granular Synthesis, and
Ulf, right? Ulf Lange-Henrik.
Pardon me?
Ulf Lange-Henrik.
Ulf Lange-Henrik, yeah, right.
Yeah.
So Ulf and I formed this duo, and actually for the first years it was almost exclusively performances that we did in, the early, it was then called electronic arts. I mean, there was beginning of digital, but like video was still analog, and sound was sort of half digital, half analog. And
we're talking about early 90s, right?
We're talking about the early 90s, like late 80s, early 90s. And it was a really quite interesting time then because, everything was the promise and everything was just starting. I mean, there was no infrastructure. There was no, I think the World Wide Web started in 94, right, or 93. So there was way before the web. And it was a very relatively small group of people, who met each other festivals mostly and stuff. Very exciting, very brilliant minds. Then as still, I mean, the area always attracts a certain group of people. That has never changed, right? Multifaceted, multi-talented people who are both, let's say, technologists, because you have to be, but also have their interests in well, obviously in art and in a wider perspective, including, in my case anyway, psychology and sociology and all of that. But yeah, we did mostly performances, and I still do. I think about a third of my shows every year, outside of the pandemic, it is actually live shows, and then the rest is installations, or like also public work that the work that you're showing at the Web Biennial, that was a commission originally for a Oscar Niemeyer building in Le Havre in France.
Theater building, right?
The theater building is a beautiful, iconic, abstract, abstract blob building. It's like shaped like a volcano, Le Volcan, and it's really beautiful. It sits in this beautiful space, and so it was this ginormous projection extravaganza, and I developed this canvas for it. And now it's like sort of just a long super stretch landscape. So I do that, which that work, for me, I thought about this today. strangely, I don't feel like, I certainly don't feel like a filmmaker, even though I edited like a ton in my life. At the end of the day, I feel like a painter, I think, or a sculptor and architect still, because before the applied arts, before I started at the University of Applied Arts in Vienna, I started as studying architecture. And that until today really informs my work in pretty much all aspects of, you know, light, sound, acoustics, and particularly the mood of spaces, or the way we feel in spaces, the way, you know, it comforts us or irritates us, activates us. I mean, this is very interesting. And certainly dynamic spaces, like all the parallel spaces that we now have, right? The digital parallel planet, that, and all the in-betweens that seem now like a seamless, our life is seamlessly weaving in the analog, you know, existing world, and then what we do, like as we talk today, right? In a in a tele world, or yeah, disembodied, if you will. Well, I mean, we're still in our bodies, but but it happens in this disembodied realm, for sure.
And the technologies are evolving in a direction that blurs these boundaries even further. And especially the 3D technology has a very important place in your work. It's almost like the newest version of a phantasmagoria, if you ask me.
Yeah, well, right, but it's, you know, the interesting part is, like, since, because I'm around for that long, I sometimes, when I was teaching also in Chicago for 5 years, and I was always referring to myself as a strange fossil who is still around, like, you know, coming from before time. But so you know, I'm very attracted to technology as something that allows certain visions and ideas to express, and that kind of this idea of omnipotency, omnipresence, these kind of things. But I was from the very beginning also like because I grew up like as a skeptic. I'm a skeptical person, so everything has a flip side, and so I wasn't interested in technology per se, but I was interested. Well, I'm interested in what happens with it, through it, how it changes our life, how it, you know, makes us do things or not, how it enables and disables things. So it's just, I mean, it's so part of our civilization now, we don't even think about it. But I lived through this kind of transition, and 3D 3D animation, 3D, you know, virtuality, all these things. Um, at the end of the day, for me, it's all about, again, it's about the body and about our body, you know, it's about the presence, a presence sort of in a strange netherworld. It's both, like what I said before, it's both disembodied and embodied. It's like it's a very strange mix, because we are always, of course, physical with ourselves, but then we extend, and it allows us to do things that otherwise are completely impossible. So the 3D work I was predominantly doing between I think 93 to about 2014, and since, and then again in actually long until 2016, and now I made about a break of the last about 4 years, but yeah.
Also, I think what you're doing has a lot to do with perception and the illusion of perception, which is also related to neuroscience, how our brains process the visual data or auditory data. And I think you kind of create these experiences where these sensory data kind of are less straightforward to process for the brain. So they're also very experimental in that sense.
Yeah, so that goes back, I think, to the entire idea of live performance in theater with music. I mean and then the emotional aspects of that. Like there's how do you say, there's at least two souls living in our bodies, right? So there's like the more intellectual side and the emotional side, or the civilized us and the animal us, something like this. And the way it was really important when I was young, and what informed, I think, my being and my work since then is this in question. I'd rather, if I experience an artwork or anything right in life, because we crave naturally, we crave intense, sensual, meaningful, if you will, experiences. And as much as, by the way, intellectual endeavors. I think just like, we couldn't exist without one or the other. Life would be, let's say if you're entirely, if you're addicted to sensual pleasures, right? Then life becomes sort of limited. And if you're just a bookworm, that you just read books and you just think and philosophize, that other things of life will never open up to you. So for me as an artist, that was always important to address both these human, I don't know, basic preconceptions or necessities, but in doubt to start with the emotional. And this is where the
Actually,
immersive ideas come into play, right? Because if you step into something, if you step into an immersive space that you don't quite figure out in the beginning, that is even a little bit daunting, then your whole mind switches into a more, primal state, because you have to deal with it. You have to maneuver it. You have to figure out whether it's dangerous or not.
it's kind of anxiety provoking, actually, walking
Yeah, right.
into,
Well, it's true, but that depends on really, that depends on people.
yeah, yeah.
Some they're more anxious people, right, and they're more adventurous people.
Mm-hmm.
And so the more adventurous people, this is always fascinating for me to see. They enjoy certain things immediately. They don't even blink. And other people, they have to really warm up to it. And some people just cannot deal with it. But I think this is, if you, I had this critique about contemporary art for a long time now, that because for me also the process of art making and art digestion or consumption is really the interesting part is that you engage personally with something, and you muse and ideally you resonate with it, right? So it captures you and it does something with you, and there's a certain pull and stuff. And this is very hard to accomplish if you are, let's say, in an exhibition.
Mm-hmm.
And before you even see something, you see this tons of text, and everything's explained up front, and everything is formally is nicely framed and also organized and very how do you say, very pre-digested in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I would say
Actually,
that.
what you said about the emotional and the rational sides of our brains, I think emotional experience also facilitates the rational experience. Like when education is concerned, when people learn something from a book versus when they learn something from actual real-time experience, it makes a huge difference. The second one is more like permanent information most of the time. So these are great like access points into certain ideas that could be experienced through a text, as you said, or this can be something more mysterious, quote unquote, that asks you to discover it, to experience it, and then you start thinking about the more rational ideas behind it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I like the idea of the access point. I mean, like when you talk about learning, Ipek, that's a super interesting point. Because obviously there are many different ways of learning, but definitively we learn very quickly when when we have to concretely deal with something.
Mm-hmm.
And or eventually, at least when you're out of school, I mean, if you don't apply something you've learned, right, you cannot ultimately really integrate it. Never becomes quite real. It becomes more like I don't know, something in waiting. So,
Shall we check your presentation? Shall we look at your presentation?
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So yeah, while we are in the screen mode, right? So,
there you go.
this
This is a great example of all this that we've talked about so far.
yeah, so that was the period, like the 11 years I worked with Rolf. And we did this, by the way, NoiseKit was a work, because I'm redoing the granular synthesis website at the moment, which is like sort of old and like non-functional. And like NoiseKit was a very interesting, unique project for the time, because we actually even developed software for that, because we needed a audiovisual sampling software so that we could compose with video as part of our sound setup, right? We always looked at this as an audiovisual composition. And so it was a 6-track video composition with multi-track audio, usually 8 channels or nine, anything from 5 channels to 9 channels of audio. And the way this was working actually was like a ton of computers that were all networked, ran the software. It's controlled through MIDI, and a central computer who would then orchestrate them all together. And these heads that you barely see here, that we shot Michael Crummer, the performer, in a special chair we had built, with neon lights around and the glass panel in front. And so he was in this chair, hitting his head against the glass pane in the front of him and the sides. And we tried to tire him out. And the whole idea was a little bit of a dark piece in the sense of, it was about imprisonment and being stuck in this, like disembodied heads that were stuck in this void, this white void. And that was all there was to it. And so it was about a little bit about agony and
space is very interesting as well. I mean, it works very well with this idea, I think.
Yeah, it was actually quite, it was a huge, it was a super expensive piece for the time. I remember I fundraised for like 2 years, or a year and a half.
Wow.
And so, yeah, it was, oh, it also had sensor input. I forgot about that. It even had like, cameras that looked down, always in front of the screen, and tracked audience. And so there was the piece would change partially depending on how many people and what they were doing. But we wouldn't advertise that, because I had found that the moment you say that there's like an interactive component, then everybody would start, waving it around, and you become this more like, hey, I do this and then you do that. And I wasn't really interested in that. But yeah, Neuskid is quite a piece, and that's the Model 5. That's really the piece, right, that put granular synthesis on the map. It's very successful. It was co-produced by Hull Time-Based Arts with Mike Stubbs, who we met at a festival in Arnhem, and who had just bought for his small organization, that was in 93 or 93, had just bought an AVID system, which is a first digital editing system, online editing. And until then, we had actually worked with analog, tape machines to do this single frame editing, because we always recorded with a performer, like initial live performance sessions, and then took like snippets of this material, like a couple of seconds or maybe a minute at the most, and built like this is a 4-channel piece, 40-minute long in total, at least the live show. And yeah, I'll give you a quick sense of it, and then I'll click further because it's loud and obnoxious. But so it was all about Web Biennial.
Actually, we showed this at the Borsan Music House at the Matter and Light exhibition.
I click forward. What?
We showed this piece back in the day at the Borsan Music House for the Matter Light exhibition. And it was, it was really very interesting.
Yeah, because I mean, it's like that clip gives in a way the false impression, but this is what most people remember from the piece. I thought the piece was actually it's quite a bit more complex, right? It starts very melodically, almost meditatively, and then at some point flips into this frenzy of this man-machine sort of kind of thing, and then later on becomes this very robotic, very redundant, going nowhere sort of condition until the battery runs out. So yeah, that was, but this, was the beginning of. We were then traveling pretty much for the next, I think, 5 years nonstop, and we produced actually really a lot of pieces, and this one was the next after Pole. It wasn't just white. But it was an abstract representational piece featuring Diamanda Galas footage in 7 screens all around that streamed out of the center. It was very, really loud, by the way. So these things, I forgot to mention that. I think that's what also everybody remembers. Ulf and I had this, we were really sick and tired of this, what we thought was completely lame art world, whatever. It was just so uninteresting, like regurgitating earlier 20th century avant-garde everything, right? So like there was neo-impressionism, there was expressionism, there was neo-formalism. There's like just like
and then the neo ones, of
the
course.
neo, right?
The post ones and the post ones, of course.
Exactly, and so we got fucked it, and we realized that if you would go into theaters or sound venues, and you would only be there for like a day or a couple of days, maybe a week if you had a long engagement, but you could do whatever you wanted. You could be loud as hell, you could be intense as hell, and it was this ritual, right? And this is like the big difference also what I often talk about between installations, which I love, and performances, that the performance is like a group of people comes together, very unimaginable now in the pandemic, and sits very close, right? And waits for the beginning, then this thing unfolds, and then eventually it reaches a peak or not, and then it ends, and so you share this. And in the sense of granular synthesis of some of my later work, very cathartic experiences, and that's a little. It's not a little. It's extremely different from installations where you decide whenever you walk into something how long you want to stay there. You know, you can. Installations never have that amount of time. Let's say that somebody wants to connect to it.
Even with conventional video art, even you have the same problem. People don't stick around for the entirety of the video. There are other people in the room, and you just step into or you step into the middle of the video work, and you start watching it from the middle, and then you wait for it to end and start again and stuff. It's very different. I agree.
I think the only one way that you could attract people in video installation or any installation to stay for a long period of time to have something both extremely violent and pornographic, there's something that is like breaking. It's like, first of all, disgusting by all means, and just obnoxious, but that would attract a lot of people. Well, others would just turn away also. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
And again, oh sorry, go on.
Have other qualities, right? And I like this idea of that because some people who do connect to installations, I've seen this over and over again, and I'm the same. If I see something that I find extremely meaningful or resonant or I don't know, enamoring, I stay for a long time. I often look at things twice or three times, so that's another, because it's more like of an open-ended red space, and you can also come back. I've seen this many times in installations of mine, that people come back. They come and then later they come again, and so that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And so this is
all this like structure reminds me again of the 19th century optic forms of entertainment, like the diorama, for instance, or the phantasmagoria and things like that. It's like a very technological version of that. And a much more abstract one, of course, because those were more like about telling a story. They had a more linear narrative, maybe, but these are like abstract and open-ended, and but I see it more like connected to that tradition in a way.
Yeah, no, this is actually completely true. A more pragmatic reason for these, screen concoctions was also that in order to have a bigger canvas in those days, there was no, mega projectors, there was no 4K or 8K.
Yeah.
So literally the only way to get some real estate was to make serial assemblies, and which of course allowed other things, right? Allowed this for the heads, like this choir-like situations that you have the same head for the same person, but 7 times around, stacked in time, and you get very beautiful also sound structures. But this shows a little bit, and this is why I'm showing it, the insane amount of bass in the, everything at the bottom is sub bass. It's like,
Wow.
we had this crazy technical writers that, asked for 30,000 watt of, I discovered this writer a while
Whoa,
back.
that's huge.
And it was like, and so, yeah, it was interesting because I don't know, it's also like to create something. I mean, there's a real reason behind it. It's not just like attitude. To create something so extreme and otherworldly, right? That for a moment you cannot but get out of your day-to-day, habitual corset, and that allows possibly, potentially, something to happen. So it's a little bit like, um, shaking somebody. And in that case, literally, this is so physical, right? It's like
Yeah, I
that,
was gonna
it
ask you about
energizes.
that. It's not just a mental shift, it's a physical shift because you have all this intense sound around you, this vibration, all these lights blinking at a certain speed, and
Yeah, it's very visceral. There's
mhm.
this visceral quality. So it's more like you're really bathing in something. That for me was becoming more and more interesting. Like, and I coined that from, when you grow up in Austria, you're in nature a lot, just necessarily. And my mother was born in the countryside, so I spent a lot of my youth in the country, and in the mountains and mountain climbing and whatnot. And I, it's just like the existence outside, in particularly if you go high up in the mountains, where things become way more existential than in the plains, because you have less air, much more risk, you get tired. So it's like these weird things that change in your uh, in your brain. You get more and more euphoric, right? Because it's like you exercise all day, you go up and up. So emotionally, you completely open up. It becomes, every hour you further go up, it becomes more beautiful, more mesmerizing. Then you walk into and out of clouds once you're all the way up there on certain days. It's just totally magical. But it's also very, very dangerous. So if you're not prepared and the weather changes, which it can do, or you're just stupid, right? And you just fall off the cliff and that's that, and you're done. So I don't know, it's like that all of that, in a way, for me, is are qualities that just remind you of, I don't know, or as a contrast truly to civilization, right? And our need to control everything. We love control, and this is also
Yeah.
where technology comes in. We adore technology because it allows us to control everything. And now, even in the pandemic, this is what would we do without technology? I mean, we are safely at home, all of us that can afford that, and as are privileged enough, and then we engage in conversations and discussions, or pretty much anything. So
This kind of
yeah,
allows us to feel we still have control over our daily lives.
yeah, exactly. And we are not completely alone, right? We are not alone.
Exactly,
We're
yeah.
not stuck entirely. And by the way, a lot of us still can work, right, from home because of that.
Yeah.
But the biggest thing is we are indoors, and the comfort of having a safe home, and what you said, Ipek, yesterday, when we briefly chatted about like unnecessarily coming earthquake right to Istanbul or LA or similar places. Whatever we do in that respect, whatever we try to control the environment, we try to be on top of things.
It's a joke. It's basically a joke, I think. We have this illusion that we are almost in full control of the environment, but it's actually, we completely depend on it to survive.
Exactly. We totally depend. And in the end, it's like it's an illusion. It's like I always say, it's an illusion of control and an illusion of safety, right? I mean, to some extent, and certainly much more than our forefathers. There's no, we've accomplished a lot, but we also ruined the planet in the process. There's always the flip side. Anyway, I think this is the beginning of, here's like Feld, which is also a granular synthesis piece from 2000, I think. And which was an abstract piece about, a line of light that opens up audiovisual again. And for me, this was the beginning of my later work also about flicker, rediscovering flicker and stroboscopic light and the mind expanding, if you will, or heightened experiences that come with stroboscopic light. It's a piece that is partially very meditative and very, ambient. And then at other times, like really intense. I often compared it, or explained it as a kind of a weather setting, like a condition that slowly changes over time. And there's really, there's day and night, and there's mellow.
It almost manipulates your thoughts, at a very high speed, because it's usually, as you say, it's about color, is about the atmosphere, the ambient, and you step into a room with a color and you slowly adjust to it, you slowly digest it, but here you don't even have that time allowed.
Yeah.
And you have this bombardment of thoughts when you look at it. I personally had.
Yeah, it's like it's both a bombardment, but it also has like extremely soothing quality. Strangely, I remember when it was first shown in Pittsburgh, there were a bunch of people who came back. The gallery director told me every week, at least once, to meditate in this space. I thought that was like, I never thought it was possible, but that piece was a direct result of a complete and utter exhaustion of myself, at least after like years of constant traveling and production and being so tired and worn out, and especially with loud screaming and things. So yeah, and so this is like the beginning of, we talked earlier about my 3D work, 3D bodies. I started with a collaboration with the French ballet Pressure Cage, and I wanted to have something that could interact with dancers in real time. So I started with this real-time 3D Unreal Tournament engine, and then later, after the ballet, made a cave piece for Ars Electronica, where this bodies was also very dark, where bodies were just hanging down and swaying, and you could try to touch them and they would try to get away from you and jerk all the time, like sort of semi-torture.
So these bodies are based on the actual bodies of the dancers. These bodies are actually based on the actual bodies of the dancers.
No, well, sort of, right? Like what a dancer would kind of generally look like, slim and if anything emaciated. But the dance work was, the title was M, or Aim, in French, pretty much. And the musing of the piece was about, what constitutes hell on earth. I found it very interesting in the sense of, we agreed after some lengthy discussion that hell on this planet starts when you lose control of your body, either way. So that could be pretty much anything, from being in prison, being paralyzed, being just captured and at the will of somebody else. So that would include, whatever war, whatever, all this kind of thing. And so the work that I did then was a lot about losing control and being out of control, being like actually subjected to some invisible force that is not controlled. So you have lost agency, and like almost the opposite of what technology suggests, to have more agency, to be more in control, to have more potency. And Karma Cell, which I did at Le Frenois in France when I was teaching there, is a bit more peaceful. It's just this falling bodies, infinitely falling bodies and tumbling around, convulsing at times. It's ambiguous. It's in between, frightening and disturbing and I don't know, sublimely beautiful. And then that, and I think remember when we met, the Hive installation was stereoscopic installation. So there was the next generation of the real-time bodies, which had become a lot more, at least on first glance, a lot more peaceful and beautiful. There was more like about flocks of birds.
Very poetic, actually.
Of fish, but and there was a big difference that if you looked closely, fish. If you ever swam in a school of fish or look at birds, they don't crash into each other. They're synchronous swimmer par excellence. They're like, it's like incomprehensibly synchronous. I don't understand how they do it, but they can never touch, right? And there are like thousands of them. But these bodies, that this cluster of bodies, like constantly crash into each other. And so they're, so they're interacting with each other in a
almost like ghostly.
Ghostly, right? And they're in this void, but the void has clear confines. There is definitely, a sort of a box that cannot. It's actually it's camera wall, so they can only go where the camera, shows them, and they cannot escape the camera also. So it's more
when you're in the space as a viewer, you can experience this 3D. Like you put on the glasses, and actually these bodies come towards you, and they just pop out of the two-dimensional space of the canvas or the screen, which is incredibly.
When stereoscopic, it's slightly different. It's actually true. And they're small. The weird thing is, they become quite more like, I don't know. Even on a big projection, they become miniatures. So, yeah. So I did a couple of these, right? And then that was a great piece on an old industrial space. It's actually a real photo with a real video, but it was so dark in there that, you couldn't, at least then I didn't have the camera to film it. It was basically 5 pools of these bodies that are synchronized. and over time change, like throughout the day. That was like an installation that ran for like 6 months as part of the London, the cultural program of the London Olympics in 2012. And yeah, so you know,
Just to
everything real time.
just to clarify something, are these bodies algorithmically choreographed, or how does it work? Is it a generative work?
Right, that's a really good question. So semi-algorithmically. So what happens is there's it's all physics driven, a simulated physics. And in this physics world, there's parameters that I developed with a programmer, and particularly for this body of work that has gravity X, Y, Z, and then potential of attraction and rejection, and then all other aspects like friction, and nervousness of, because each of these bodies is a ragdoll, meaning if something happens to one joint, it resonates throughout the body and affects the whole rest of the body. And the bodies attract in space, and then this data, so it's kind of a feedback loop, is massively generative, but there are compositional, obviously, directives that I give from within the sound program, because the bodies create position data, which then create sound, right? Each body is one sound instance and becomes this like sort of drone-like thing.
So
And,
each frame has its own rules, basically. Each frame has its own rules. It has a different 0.0 where it departs from, and then it evolves in an uncontrollable way.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
But the controllers that I assert is that at some point I tell them to, get together.
Okay.
And then go apart. So I make this markers in time, and I can tell them, loosely move left to right, right? Sort of bounce left to right. So it's how do you say? It's not fully autonomous. It's like semi-autonomous. They would do whatever you tell them. That the last set of commands will define what they would do into eternity, if you will. And then within that framework, that whatever the parameters tell them, they will do various things that are not predictable, or not entirely predictable, and so forth. So I thought it was really, really very interesting. And so it never stops, right? It just kept going. I mean, this was running for 6 months.
Oh, amazing! And do you document what's going on there? Like you just start playing it from 0.0, and it starts to unravel and evolve, and all throughout the duration of the exhibition. And I think nothing there is really replicable, repeatable, but you allow it to just, stay in that moment, probably.
You could not really do it. So because right now I'm working for, I think next year I want to make I was asked to do a dome version of one group of bodies for like a big, astronomical dome. And I have to record that. And so I have to record the real-time stream, can't be real-time. And so I have to find a way now, I'm working with the same program again, to record all the motion data, because the sound is in real time. So I have to record the sound, because it's a huge map of 4,000 by 4,000 pixels or something.
Wow.
And you can't do it really in real time anyway, and or barely so. And so we first record the sound, and while we record the sound, all the motion data is being recorded. And then the recorded motion data will be used to render offline, what happened, and then it should all match up again. But,
sounds like a huge endeavor.
Hmm?
Sounds like a huge endeavor.
Yeah, it's a little, well, but I mean, one of the reasons I didn't continue with it since 2000,
16,
14, 15, is because it's just technologically it takes so much time, and it's really expensive. It's just all these things, right? So, but I'm starting to really get excited about it again. So, but anyway, that sort of brings me to work that is actually much more known, from what I'm doing, and this is this post-granular synthesis phenomenological immersive work that uses fog and stroboscopic and pulse lights and sound. And so you enter these spaces that see on the left, which is fog from the beginning, or feed the live show, where you first sit down and you look at, in the beginning you're in a theater, you look at the screen, these bodies do something for like about 20 minutes. And then after that, all of a sudden, all of a sudden 12 fog machines come to life and fill the space with fog within minutes. And then you're like, the space goes away and you're in this another world. So that's like, the moment the fog comes in. I was actually at Wiener Festwochen, I think a couple of years ago. And so, yeah, this is actually, you don't see anything like this. This is a pure propaganda picture. What you see is about, maybe half a meter of rope when you enter the inner door. You don't see your hand in front of your, if you put your hand out, you don't see it, right? You see nothing from your chest down, and you don't see people, you hear people. And so there's this video that we did in New York in 2009, I think, which asks people's reaction, because you cannot document the piece. It happens in your visual cortex, at least the visual impression of this kaleidoscopic, sublimely, I don't know, beautiful, like weird lighting impression. And so
I've never felt like that.
I love this video because
forms are appearing in front of you, fractals and V waves that just moved around in clockwise direction and counterclockwise direction. Different patterns emerging that crossfade into each other, that spread out.
And the shapes were so beautiful. So beautiful. The colors
melting into each other, patterns just swirling around each other.
Things flying through the air. And
faces and like pieces of wood and stuff that like I knew wasn't there.
Yeah, no pieces of wood.
Crackling around me like lightning, sort of, but on a tiny scale. You don't know if you're focusing on something 10 feet away or if it's right here.
I was always staring in front for some reason, and then at some point.
Very interesting. A lot of people.
And it was the same thing.
You know what? Actually, they sound like people who used some interesting substance for the first time, and they are kind of describing their experience with it. Incredible.
It's actually that's also true, Ipek. I mean, and a lot of people compare it, or their references, LSD or psychotropic drugs, hallucinogenic drugs, which is sort of true, but then not, because if you take a drug, you can't just walk out of it, right? I mean, it's like it takes you over for good. And so this still, the interesting part here is that it definitively changes a very essential aspect, in that case, the visual, our habits of visual navigation completely. And this is, but everything else stays the same. You're still there. You're still sober. You're still, I mean, sober, because you know it. People come out very happy, by the way. And I often talked about that. I made this joke. I'm not any longer, but I might as well tell it. I used to say that the piece ruined my reputation as a dark artist, because people would just emerge from that space and be happy. And like, you know, and everybody, when we did this video of audience reactions, the first edit that Piyama and I forgot the name of the other. Oh my God! Like, you know, two wonderful then youngsters working at Three-Legged Dog in Manhattan, where this was shown, and the first version of this video, about half of the reactions were references to God and to the whatever bigger and there's a cannot do. So we had to, I mean, definitely threw all that out. But yeah, it has, what I'm saying is that for better or worse, it has a spiritual quality. It has something.
Absolutely.
Right.
And you know, in many religious rituals in the past, people used to also involve substances, the more ancient civilizations, I mean.
Absolutely. And there's a theory, by the way, and this leads me, you know, to
for Span.
There's something, the downside of this piece, of one of the side effects for a certain group of people is what's called photosensitive epilepsy, right? Mm-hmm. I'm missing the slide. So photosensitive epilepsy is if you can't digest continuous flickering light, right? Stroboscopic light at a certain frequency. And when I eventually, because I had so many cases of convulsing people with seizures, mm-hmm. and this always happens to some extent when the piece is shown, with all the warnings and it's not making a difference. But as I was researching this in depth and learning about it, there's theories that every and each prophet that ever ruled the planet was somewhat photosensitive, or, you know, had some kind of messed up, perceptually speaking, mind. That because one of the effects of seizures, I mean, mm-hmm. there's the really physically draining aspect and the dangerous aspect. If you have a grand mal seizure, like with this petit mal and grand mal, but there is something, there's this mind warping aspect of seizures that makes you feel like you have these visions that you have, right? So Jesus, Muhammad, whatever, might have been just photosensitive.
And Julius Caesar, if I'm not wrong, he was epileptic.
Huh?
Julius Caesar was also epileptic.
Oh, there you go. But he didn't really end well. I mean, yeah. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that is that part is still something. But personally, I find so interesting about it, and you know, to come back to perception, mm-hmm. Which became a really like a long-term focus of my, let's say, conceptual research. And that we think of perception as, you know, something more mechanical, you know, that the eyes, that the ears, that the skin, the tactile, the smell, but all the senses that we are aware of. And then somehow we take it in and we smell and we see and we hear, and that's that. But it's actually really the least of it. It's just the beginning of it, because that's just the the sense organs. And what for me is the most interesting, and where the party starts, is what our being, our brain, our mood, our education, and upbringing, all these factors, how they play together to create from all the sensorial input to create a cultured impression that is deeply rooted in a period, in a location, in a state of mind, right? So like very basically, if you're in a good mood, like if you're happy, or if you're depressed, changes everything, how you perceive something, or what you see and what you don't see, what you even notice and what you don't notice. And so there's all these, there's theories, psychological theories of perception, philosophical underpinnings of perception. And what I found one of the most interesting, and cut me off if that gets too long, Ipek, but
don't worry about that. It's so great. I mean, and we have time. We have unlimited Zoom time, so just keep on going.
So the most interesting for me is actually the habitual back end of it, because life, in a way, a functioning life, is deeply rooted in habits, right? So what also in terms of time experience is deeply cyclical, things we just do without thinking, constantly, in intervals, and sort of prop us up. So we are, at some point when we grow up, we understand a person is a human being, and so forth. That this is a living being, this is an unorganic object, or an inanimate object, and so forth, right? And we do understand we are inside, we are outside. So make all these distinctions, and all these distinctions help us filter on a daily basis what is not needed for our navigation, for the task at hand, especially when we are focusing on work or something, right? We can go, for instance, into like a trance-like state. We forget about completely what's around us. We forget about time. We are completely consumed in what's in front of us, and so these things is like, it's a sort of, the longer I think about this, the more interesting this gets. So long story short, perception is excessively malleable, and is certainly not a fixed thing. And so all these works of mine with phenomenological spaces, use that as a starting point. And often this is just by creating an environment where, with the simple gesture of having to give up a perceptual habit that you relied upon all your life, right? Like in the case of the later ones now, these things, soul and stuff.
I love this work a lot.
Yeah, which is like complete darkness. You enter a space of complete darkness. Very simple. And but ever so often you have a third of a second of an animated light. It's abstract, and which then triggers after images where you think you see something. I mean, you do. You see the afterglow of what you just saw, part of the space also, and you fall back into darkness. So it's just, this was in Berlin in 2017 when it premiered, and this beautiful, ginormous old power plant, Berghain-Halle.
Amazing space again. Amazing space, really.
Yeah. And of course, the interesting part is it's almost like virtual analog, meaning it's a kind of a close to VR experience, but it's completely physical. I mean, minus the big LED display in the dark that of course you don't see because only when there's something on it, it will come to make light. So everything is really 100% dark. And what I found so interesting about it, and this is where this comes in, it is extremely difficult to create 100% darkness in our days. It is so difficult. I mean, there's of course regulations in public spaces, but there's all these millions of LED lights. There's I don't know. It's just, and then there's people, the audience who comes with all these things with like watches and phones and
phones
cameras.
are
So so you have to. I realized I have to make the audience drop all the devices. And then that becomes all of a sudden very interesting because so you go into this, but you have to leave behind your devices, which now is, again, talking habitually, is like a part of our body. And what's fascinating to me, some people getting very angry if you ask them to drop off their phone. It's almost like a personal insult it's inappropriate. How can you ask me to do that? And in Barcelona in February, before the pandemic broke, I shot the piece at this absolutely phenomenal 3-day event, which is a Loom, which is like really lighting installations, audiovisual installations in this part of Barcelona. Really, it was absolutely fantastic. And they had the great idea to make like bags that you can seal, so everybody can keep their phone, but you have to switch it off, put it in a bag, the bag gets officially sealed, and then you can take it with you. So you don't have
Wow, that's great.
So smart. It was so smart. I love that. It's a new.
You know what? We need to make it compulsory at the theaters, concert halls, because it's a huge problem. Huge problem, really.
And so it's a kind of a refuge from your own, from your own constant impulses to Insta whatnot, text and so forth. And especially to look at things that you experience, to not really experience them, but to document them, to be always in documenting mode or in framing mode and so forth. And
I think my experience is personally that when I try to document something, I later remember much less of it, the actual experience, than some much older experience that I had when I didn't have a mobile phone, for instance. This is really interesting.
It is. It's like it changes everything. It's like completely.
And you rely on that device for like past referencing. Like what happened that day? Who was there? Yeah, you immediately check your photo archive and your social media history. But you don't remember who was there. It's crazy.
No, it's as much. I mean, it's the same thing, right? It's extremely helpful. It's opening your another realm and all these possibilities. But it's also like, I mean, it's certainly addictive, and it certainly prevents you often from being, in the presence. And yeah, it's particularly, this happened a long time ago. In 97, ages ago, I had a moment, and I went to India for 5 weeks by myself, which was a fantastic trip. And I decided then, way before cell phones, obviously, or not so, almost.
I think in mid-90s we had those huge cell phones, the Ericsson phones.
Right. I had one, I think mine, the first one was 96, but there's certainly no, you couldn't roam or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't even bring a camera. I did not bring a camera. And I remember as I was sort of drifting through the south of India, everybody who I met, all the locals and native Indians, they couldn't believe that I didn't have a camera because they had only encountered people who came to shoot or like, to capture. And I thought,
show off back home, sometimes
course.
organize an exhibition with exotic frames and stuff.
And so, yeah, but I mean, there's always, it's a positive thing. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I'm repeating myself too often, but long story short, if you go into these darkness installations, which are predominantly darkness, but then also very bright at times. And so, yeah, you have to let go of that. And the downside from me as the artist is that because there's no Instagram boost, people, so it's hard. It's like, because, everything has to fly or be Instagrammable in order to get momentum, right? So this is like another, it's an antagonistic almost sort of setting. Anyway, yeah, this is, by the way, an approximation, right, of like what I find so interesting about this aura after images that you.
Yeah, I'm kind of playing with it right now, and the grayish area around the more black area keeps vibrating when I change my focus. It's really interesting.
I mean, it's like a still image, right? But the impression you have is not still. It's
yeah, I can't make it static. Never.
Because it's like about your photo, chemical receptors on your eyes, particularly night vision, who get overloaded temporarily and then have to, recover. And in that process, you have all these transformations and phenomena. It's really quite interesting. They can layer and so forth. Yeah, I did, and the interesting part with that work is, of course, the strange thing is you always see it with light. And this is an impression you never have. You never see a space like this. You just see it for like a mini moment. But I love that work goes in all these special spaces. This was a former
tunnel, or
it's a beer storage in Germany, and like in
fantastic.
Okay. Anyway, and so this shows you a little bit, right, how this is done.
Yeah.
So you have pretty much like a surround sound and like a LED modular display. That's the last piece from last year, one of the last pieces, which is more like a not a square, but a panoramic screen, and does a couple of other things. So, yeah, and then I do these things also, as said before, right? That was the Le Havre thing, which, yeah, it's actually pretty cool.
And there, this human body theme comes back in a slightly different way. You have the heads, these like free floating heads with no agency or whatever. And you have these like awkwardly combined natural and artificial kind of spaces, fragments of spaces. Let's talk about this work in more detail, if you wish.
Yeah, right. It took us long enough, right, to get to the piece that is shown at the Web Biennial. So
it was amazing, by the way. Thanks once more.
Thank you. I'm really, so I'm happy. I'm very happy to be part of it. It's a great, very timely project, obviously. at some point, and you know, when I said that I grew up half in the countryside, but I spent my life in cities, big cities, really, for most of it. I mean, I lived in Vienna, and then now 20 years in the States, in New York, and partially in Chicago. And so I realized at some point that my natural environment had become cities, airports, planes, and you know, the super civilized layer. So I decided to revisit what was left of what I call original nature, which doesn't exist anymore, because there's nothing that you know, is not one way or the other affected by humanity. But I went out, you know, first to the American West, which I really love, and deserts mostly, and desert mountains, and started to come up with, I mean, it's like, so the question for me was always not, the question is not why cities are successful, because it's obvious, right? As the centers of development and progress and intellectual discourse and obviously commerce, obviously, no question. So they are what really drives and incubates, right, generally our species, and what also drove global connectivity, whatnot, and stuff. But what I found so interesting is that I think 50% now, more than 50% of people live in cities. So for them, like, nature is like, you know, buildings and streets and the occasional tree, and the park. It's like the idea of the park as a framed piece of organic nature, that again is like organized and designed and, you know,
Trimmed. Trimmed and controlled and
exactly manicured and like, you know, beautified, and that includes, by the way, national parks, right? National parks.
Sure.
Are parks. I mean, we leave them to themselves, but it's like our generosity to tell this piece of nature, say, okay, you can stay there by yourself for now, because we think that's a great idea. But this is your boundary, right? This is where you can exist. And so we frame it nevertheless. So I realized, and especially because part of, like, you know, being a contemporary artist and showing around the world is, of course, that I travel all the time, and I went pretty much everywhere. And it's just astonishing, Ipek. I mean, I'm sure this is like no news, but it's astonishing how dramatically, like, the world is still changing before our eyes, right? I mean, there's always like the moment of crisis when things slow down a little bit, like now. But, you know, I remember the first time I was in China, and I was used to, let's say, building booms in New York or like Western cities, which, you know, we can't even compare it. Like when you build 1 or 2 towers in New York, like any nondescript Chinese town builds a cluster of 20 towers just in like a third of the time. And I was
you haven't seen Istanbul in the last 5 years, right?
No, right, I'm sure. Istanbul probably is unrecognizable.
That's also a very, very, very intense construction work. And we have a very speedy change also.
Yeah, because Istanbul is a mega city, right? So it's one of the places that can keep growing, and so for me, it boils down to this, that, and this is totally attached to technology, and let's say to two merging layers historically of technology, like, you know, whatever from the industrial age and mechanical age, and now overlaid with digital information technology. And this together created this monster machines that allow you to build and construct anything in such a mind-boggling short period of time. So what I coined, like, we entirely now live in a kind of a constructed of our own concept kind of world. I mean, we construct.
And with this like video mapping technique, actually the cities themselves become our canvases of information, screens of information. We don't need the actual physical structure anymore. We can just do it with a projection, and it's crazy, especially as you said, in China or in Japan or in Seoul, South Korea. The cities are like entire screens of information.
Yes, and so it's both very, which makes, you know, which turns day into night into day. Mm-hmm. There's no more darkness, by the way. There's like a building that is lit up, like makes a lot of light. This is, you know, this is what I think earlier, I'd have to go back to these two books, because I went to this, oh my God, right back. I went to this conference. God, I hit the back button so many times that this is very unprofessional. So
don't worry.
What I'm saying is I went to a conference really a long time ago now in Amsterdam, Sonic Acts, and there were two speakers at the conference, and one was speaking about the vanishing night sky, and the other one was speaking about artificial darkness, right? And like starting with I want to.
No, this is a great recap, by the way. It's very useful.
I don't think it's useful, but thank you. So this is it, right? So so Paul Bogart talked about the end of night, that nobody could see the Milky Way anymore. Certainly not in this. Nobody who grows up in the city knows that there's a Milky Way, right? And there's this grand image of like just the galaxy, like, you know, like glistening above. You have to go, and he said that in the States, there are only two places, that was like already, I think now 7 or 8 years ago, there are two places left with a pristine nighttime, uninterrupted by light pollution. And then Noam Alcott, right, at the same time, started writing this book, Artificial Darkness, which, you know, refers to, starts in a way with Wagner, you know, the German composer, and his theater in Bayreuth, and the idea to control the interior drama space or event spaces to really get rid of all light there, except the light that you need for the drama. And I thought that was super interesting. So we got rid of the darkness outside, but we desperately tried to, you know, for certain applications, we created on the inside, like myself now.
And you know what? This is such a curious, deja vu, because yesterday when we were talking to Michael Najjar, he showed us a work, a like manipulated digital image, where he was talking about the newly installed satellites in space. And Elon Musk is planning to install like tens of thousands of satellites, and at some point we'll not be able to see the night sky anymore. We will only see artificial reflected light of the satellites and not natural stars. So this is a very curious coincidence. I wanted to also mention that.
Yeah, it's totally true. There was a huge outcry when they started doing this. There's, internet satellites, because they're in relatively low orbit. And when they started doing that, it just started putting out, every time they start one of the rockets, right, they put 80 satellites out, and it will be, I think, thousands of them at the end, to make a complete, to allow complete coverage of the planet.
Yeah.
And when they started doing it, they did not talk to one astronomer before, nothing, nobody. They just did it, and they were allowed to do it. And then they had, the satellites were so reflective that at the beginning, they were so visible, especially when they were still close together. So then there was this outcry of the astronomers, right, worldwide. And the new satellites that they send up now have shields that reduce the reflectivity. And so it supposedly will be not as bad, but still there will be all these moving objects against the otherwise, much further away objects of the night sky. So yeah, it's so fitting. It is so fitting, Ipek, because it doesn't matter anyway, because nobody sees the Milky Way anyway. Who cares? Right? I mean, it's like this kind of thing. So because we are often, when I'm a bit more like cynical or pessimistic, I think, we're building all these, amazing new worlds and everything, both physical and virtual, but we are building it while absolutely in parallel. It's a trade-off. We are building this, and everything else is actually being used as a resource, right, to allow the building of our new reality. So we'll see until the zombie apocalypse. Then it will be.
Going back to Orts, you were talking about the desert, and that you went to the western side of the continent, and you did some shooting there, probably.
Right. So the desert, right, is I have no. I just realized, Ipek, I don't even have stills of Ort more.
No worries. Our viewers can see it online at webbiennial.com. So.
But so there's two aspects here, right? In Ort, there's two major aspects, or three.
Perhaps we could go back to the installation shot.
Yeah, that's actually true. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's go to this anyway. But so the three aspects. One is obviously, a virtual constructed reality. The other one is the idea of deserts as something, as an unattractive piece of land, right, that cannot immediately be made use of. It's just like a wasteland. Desert as a wasteland. But of course, it's really not. It's like it's normally a rich environment. The American West is a great example of that. If you go out to Utah, for instance, which I did a couple of times, around the Salt Lake, but this generally throughout the American West, all the deserts, half of the deserts are Army shooting ranges. there's no access because it's military. There is nuclear waste sites, toxic incineration plants, all kinds of other waste dumps. Then there's some reservations, which of course native Indians got these barren lands in exchange for their beautiful homelands that they were driven out. And so it's this. It's just it's both. It's just really interesting. It's both a metaphor for what happens when everything dies, right? Or most everything dies. There's not enough water. It's like this kind of extreme environment that barely sustains anybody. It's like what in Ort, for instance, you have a couple of scenes where these 3D heads stick out of desert plains in a very haphazard pseudo, let's say, integration, just more like sketch than actual. And I was always so fascinated with the history of Easter Island, right? This famous island in the Pacific with this enigmatic, big sculptures, had torso sculptures that, and the civilization that at some point must have been extremely vibrant and extremely prosperous and productive, and then just went away. And to my understanding, East Island suffered a classic environmental collapse because people there just, it was an island, very limited amount of land. It must have been extremely tropical, jungle, whatnot in the beginning. And the civilization of East Island who built these statues managed to, over time, just cut all the forest, mostly also to support their statue making obsession. And eventually there was nothing left to sustain them. And that was the end of it. And I just, it's kind of a...
Very interesting.
Sort of a fairy, not a fairy tale, it's actually a fable, if you will, right? Or like
yes.
a possible thing that could very well happen to us because we just think we are invincible. I mean, short of the moments of earthquakes, short of the moments of natural disasters, that we think we're so pumped with our civilizatory prowess. And
we have a huge ego. We have this huge ego as humanity, but I think this pandemic made it a little less so.
A little. Our ego is somewhat diminished.
Yeah,
it's actually true. It's like and the other thing of the pandemic, which goes right with it, right? The way it has this immediate effect on the environment, like the whole planet.
Incredible.
Just having a break. It's unbelievable.
This image, I think I will never forget this image. Dolphins just invaded the Bosphorus. They are always around, but with the pandemic, when people just disappeared, they started coming closer to the coastline and becoming playful, playing with people, and it's incredible.
Oh wow! Yeah. I planted an apple orchard this spring because I actually spent not that much time in my studio in the pandemic. I built a garden from pretty much scratch, which I wanted to do anyway. Mm-hmm. But I thought it would have 2 weeks of time to put in an apple, like 5 apple trees, not really a mini orchard. And I was all pumped and happy, and we are still we're not suburban in Staten Island. We are still within the urban North Shore. The back of the property that we are slopes up to, it's a forested area, but there's roads everywhere. There's no way. So one day I come in the morning to weed, I have an invasive species, that Japanese knotweed, that drives me nuts. And that I take care of every day. It's a hopeless endeavor. And so I take the knotweed out, and then at some point I look up and all my leaves are gone from the trees. And I thought, what? And then I realized that I had the visit from deer, from bambi most likely. And they ate all my, they ate half of my trees. And I thought, how is this possible? It's like and then definitely pandemic related, right? With the, like the same thing with the dolphins. It's so quiet, just the quietness.
And I always imagine animals just making fun of us between themselves, like. So they just claiming their territory back in a way.
Exactly, and they're just at least expanding. Yeah, they're expanding where they understand that they can, go without being endangered. So, yeah. Well, I'm sure it's going to change in due time, but.
Yeah, we are so many that will still be enough. With half of us being confined to our homes, will still be enough to deplete Earth's resources for sure.
The thing, anyway, Ipek, to come back to Earth one last time, right? Because it's like, if you look at it, and this is why, for me, this is a kind of a painting, or it's several chapters, painting chapters that depict certain scenes that change over time. And I mean, the heads, which are actual real human beings, right, that were captured, and 3D captures. And then I edited them in terms of what they do, particularly the facial features. It's just basic. With, of course, in a 3D program. And there it was very interesting in France, when this, I think, premiere, somebody said, they seem to be angry. And I thought they weren't angry. I thought they were more like unwell. I mean, it's just like they're definitively not happy. I mean, one of my inspirations for it was definitely, this kind of zombie-esque, ambivalent zombie-esque demeanor. That you are like, first of all, it's all loop-based. They're caught in their loops. There's like, they're both natural and unnatural. And but yeah, they sit there almost like monuments. I think this is really what they are. They're monuments to something that is either coming or gone, right, already in these otherwise.
And what's mesmerizing is that there's also the building involved, and it's a theater building. And theater is about narrative. Theater is about mannerism. Theater is about drama. And you're adding another layer of drama and narrative around it.
On the outside. Yeah. It's kind of, I mean, I really liked that it was a theater, and strangely, when the work was finished, it felt, I didn't intend that, but part of the work really feels like, stage sets in a funny way. It's just, I mean, the other idea was, it's all 3D, but it's more like 2D. It's pseudo 3D. Everything's very flat. Everything is kind of, there's no depth of space, but that's a deliberate decision. So it sits in this, again, more like painting surface up front, very sandwiched together in this obvious collage of, of, of things. But of course, in Le Havre, it looked quite spectacular, and it dramatically transformed the plaza at night. Anyway,
and the figures are really a bit confined, so it also creates that tension. The framing is like full of tension because of that.
Yeah, and then I mean things move, right? I mean these are still image, and things move, of course, and they move around and over time, and so you see certain things, move around. Other things, you have to walk around yourself to see various parts, which I like about the rolled up canvas that you show at the Web Biennial, because now you have the entire canvas as one, landscape. Yeah, that's
amazing.
That's that so far, and now anyway, we'll see what happens. But I think what we didn't talk about, what the pandemic, what will come after the pandemic, how much life will. I think about this. I wonder, even if there's a vaccine, I think nothing will just go back to normal. Not that quickly.
And actually, some thinkers say going back to normal is exactly what we should not be doing, because our normal was the problem behind this all. So we should change our consumption mechanisms. We should change our daily routines. And so, a lot of debate is going on, and it obviously will be a challenging period. But thankfully, we have art, we have the artists, and we have these great experiences that we share together. And Kurt, thanks once more for this wonderful presentation. And this will be available probably by tomorrow on our YouTube channel. I will be sharing the link with you as well. And for those who want to visit the Web Biennial and watch Ort, the URL is webbiennial.com. And of course, a big hi to Claudia Hart as well from our side.
I will pass it on.
And thank you so much, Kurt, for this very generous time of yours.
Thanks, Ipek. Absolutely likewise.
And it's always exciting to talk about what's behind all these works and entering your mind, basically. You allow us to enter your mind, which is always very exciting for us.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, again, it's great to be part of that. It's a great group of artists. And yeah, it's sort of also interesting, right? Because this is really something that can still be done. And it just works, right? It's super. And thanks, Ipek, it was great. I really enjoyed that.
Me too.
Maybe ran a little bit over time. But,
I think it's been great. It's been a wonderful experience. And again, this will be available on YouTube for all of us to enjoy.
Okay, I'll post it.
Thank you very much, Kurt.
All right.
And have a nice weekend.
Yeah, you too.